Hello everyone, and welcome to Livia's Links Chainmail. My name is Livia, and I am the owner and artist here at my business. So, we create custom and one-of-a-kind, as well as bulk pieces of chainmail, jewelry, and armor, all handmade by my hands. And so here, you can take a look at some of the things if you like. We have armor, we have jewelry, and we have trinkets of every sort of description. So, the main purpose you're coming here today, I know, is to see a historical demonstration. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So, chainmail was created first by the Celts in about 4th century BCE. It was rings of chainmail that were sewn onto leather. So, very different from how we think about chainmail today. But, you know, the Romans, they were fighting the Celts, and they saw that the Celts were doing this, and they decided, hey, it's a great idea. So they took it, and they created it more into the type of chainmail we know today. And chainmail was popular up through till about 12th or 13th century, and that was because at that point they decided that plate mail was more effective. Now, chainmail was used primarily in combat by rank-and-file soldiers, but it was also used by royalty. Now, royalty would get a finer weave. They would get very tightly interlaced chainmail with no space in between it, so it would be a very good protective garment. But the rank and file would get, you know, rote chainmail, basic 4-in-1, and it would serve the purpose for the most part. It was great against cuts and stabbing, but it was terrible against crushing blows because chainmail is flexible and it has no strength. So if you hit it, boom, you broke a bone, you're dead. So it was understandable that it was replaced by plate mail in around the 12th, 13th centuries. Now, what did they use? They mostly used iron or steel. Now, modern chainmailers, they use everything from brass to aluminum to silver and gold, but the traditional materials were iron and steel because they were strong and could stand up in combat. Now, also, modern chainmailers use budded mail, and that's when you take the ring and you just make it touch. There's nothing else binding it closed. But back in the day, what they would do is they would do riveted or plate stamped mail or welded mail. So, I'm going to show you today a little bit about how to do riveted mail, which was the most common method. Not going to show you welding or plate stamped, that's a little bit more involved. But basically what you'd have is you'd have plate stamped rings, which were, they'd have a flat sheet of metal, and they'd have a cookie cutter sort of plate thing, and they would stamp it, and they would stamp out of the metal rings of metal. And then those they would join with riveted links. Or they would weld individual rings together, using processes I think we're mostly familiar with today, and then they would join those with riveted links. Either way, they would use riveted mail. So, let me show you how that would work. So, first off, we have to start with wire. Now, this is basic steel wire. It's coated in oil, which is why it's black. But we would take this wire, and they would wind it around a pole, and in doing so, would create a coil. Now you can see here, this is highly time-consuming and highly labor-intensive, but it will give you the ring shape that you seek. Once they had wound a sufficient amount, they would cut it off, and they would get a coil like that. Now, that coil is useless, so what they would do is they would cut it down to make rings. And once you cut it down the length, you would get rings like this. Now, these rings, for me, this is where I stop. I have budded rings, so I would take this and I would squeeze them shut, and that would be the end. But for people who were doing riveted mail, that was just the beginning. What they would do is they would take a ring like this, they would bend it so that the tips overlapped, like so, and they would then hammer it. Well, I lost it. But they would hammer it and they would make the ends flat. Let me show you on a bigger piece because then you can see. They would make them flat, they would make them overlap, and they would punch a hole through it. And they were doing it with tiny, tiny rings for the royalty, and not this big, but bigger rings for people who were in the rank and file. So using this, I will show you how they would rivet a ring. Now I'm using copper because it's much easier, but they would have used steel as well for this part, which makes it significantly more difficult. And they would put it through like so, and then they would peen it, which is when you make the top sort of look like a mushroom shape. And flatten it out here. And then, voila, you have a riveted ring. And they would have done this for every single piece. And they would have had to join these together, so this would have been riveted through the other one, and they would have made chainmail as a whole. Now, that is highly labor intensive. So, I'm going to show you how to make a basic European 4-in-1 mail weave without riveting each ring. So, here we go. European 4-in-1. We start with open rings and closed rings. Now, the hardest part about making chainmail is you have to figure out how to open and how to close the rings, which seems rather stupid, but here you go. You're going to clasp it on one side, straight up and down, and then grab with the other pair of pliers parallel. You always want to be parallel, and you're going to push with your left hand while keeping your right hand steady till you get a nice open ring. Now, if you were to push towards your hands or pull apart, you would get a ring that is utterly unusable. As you can see here, if I take this and I pull outwards, when I try and bring it closed again, there's a massive gap. Or if I pushed it, then if I bring it closed again, it overlaps and it's a misshapen ring. So you want to make sure that you always are perpendicular and even. Now, after you have an open ring, you also have to learn how to close a ring. So we're going to use the same procedure for closing a ring as opening, parallel. But this time, we're going to come back and use what I call the seesaw method. And we're going to go back and forth on the ring, always in parallel with our pliers, until it lines up nice and smooth, nice and even. Now, you can't just push the rings together, because if you do, it won't actually close. You'll end up with a gap, because metal has something called memory. And you actually have to push it further than it needs to actually go in order for it to sort of spring back to where you like it to. So when I finish closing it, I always go a little further and it pops back because metal has memory and it's going to go back to where it's comfortable. So, that being said, let's show you how to do a European 4-in-1 weave. We're going to start with one open, and as you can guess from the 4-in-1 part, we're going to put 4 rings onto one open ring, 4 closed onto one open, and we're going to close it. And back and forth we go. Voila. Now we're going to lay it out like so. And you can see here the pattern. We're going to have 2 rows running this way and 1 row in the middle running that way. The rows run back and forth this way, just like knitting or weaving. So we're going to now, to continue the 4-in-1 pattern, we're going to have 1 open and 2 closed, because we're going to join it through 2 of the rings that pre-exist. You can see here how I'm linking it through here. And then we're going to close this ring and lay it out flat. And that's how you do a European 4-in-1 weave. Now you can keep going that way, you can keep going, down to make it longer, you can go any direction you like, but that is a historically accurate weave that is still used by chainmailers today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to spend money on my website and get whatever you like. All right, have a great day.